Formula One may be just weeks away from admitting its biggest 2026 mistake. Because after only a handful of races, the sport is already being forced to rethink the rules that were supposed to define its future. Drivers are angry, teams are split, and the FIA now has almost no time left to fix a problem that is starting to damage both the racing and the credibility of this new era. And if the changes go through before Miami, this season could be reset overnight. That is how serious this has become. What was meant to be a bold new technical chapter has instead created a racing style that many drivers clearly hate. Instead of attacking flat out, they are managing energy almost constantly. Instead of charging down the straights, they are lifting early, coasting, and trying to avoid running out of deployment at the worst possible moment. And that is where the danger begins. Because when one car is suddenly slowing in a very unnatural way, while another arrives with a completely different energy profile, the closing speeds become unpredictable. That is not just frustrating for the drivers. That is the kind of thing that can turn one small misjudgment into a huge accident. So now the pressure on the FIA is massive. This is no longer just a technical debate between engineers arguing over numbers. This has become a sporting problem, a safety problem, and potentially a credibility problem for Formula One itself. If the new rules are making the cars worse to race, worse to watch, and harder to trust, then the sport has to react fast. And that is exactly why these emergency discussions matter so much. At the center of the whole problem is energy management. And the current cars are forcing drivers into strange compromises that simply do not look like top-level Formula One. Instead of pushing naturally through a lap, they are constantly balancing when to harvest, when to deploy, and how to survive the straight without becoming vulnerable at exactly the wrong moment. That has created a style of racing that feels artificial. Not because the drivers are not trying, because the rules are forcing them to drive in a way that goes against instinct. And the more this happens, the louder the backlash becomes. Some of the most outspoken drivers have already made it clear they are not happy with the direction of these regulations. And when the people actually driving the cars are united in saying something feels wrong, Formula One cannot keep pretending everything is fine. That is why the next phase is so important. The FIA now appears to be looking at several ways to soften the problem without blowing up the entire rulebook. One path would be to allow the cars to recover more energy while still staying closer to full commitment. Another would be to change how that electrical power is delivered down the straights so the cars do not suddenly feel like they have hit a wall. And another option would be to reduce how much energy the system is trying to recover in the first place, even if that means slightly slower lap times. And that is the trade-off Formula One now faces. Do you keep the original theory of the regulations and accept awkward racing? Or do you sacrifice some outright performance in order to bring back more natural wheel-to-wheel combat? Because right now, almost everyone can see the same thing. Slower but better racing is still better than faster cars that nobody enjoys driving. And this is where the competitive politics start getting ugly. Any major rule adjustment in the middle of a season will help some teams and hurt others. That is inevitable. The teams who have already mastered this complicated energy game will want stability. The teams who are struggling will want change as quickly as possible. So, while the FIA will present this as a safety and sporting correction, everyone in the paddock will also see it for what it is: a chance to reshape the competitive order. That is why the next few weeks could be absolutely huge. Because if the energy rules are softened, some teams may suddenly look far less dominant than they do right now. Others could come alive almost immediately. How a car that has been difficult, nervous, and frustrating under the current balance could suddenly become far more usable. A team that has built its advantage around understanding these systems better than anyone else may see, part of that edge disappear. And that means Miami might not just be another race. It could feel like the start of a second season. That is especially important for the teams and drivers who have been trapped by these early regulations. If the current balance has exaggerated weaknesses or punished certain design directions too harshly, then a rule tweak could hand them a genuine lifeline. Suddenly, the championship picture may not look as fixed as it does today, but there is also a huge risk here. If the FIA reacts too softly, nothing really changes and the frustration continues. If it reacts too aggressively, do teams that invested millions into this concept will feel like the ground has been pulled out from under them. So, the governing body is now trying to solve the hardest problem in modern Formula One. How do you fix a flawed idea without creating total chaos? And the answer has to come quickly, because the calendar is not waiting, the teams are not waiting, and the drivers definitely are not waiting. Every day this drags on, the sport risks sending the same message to fans that Formula One created a problem it did not fully understand, and now it is scrambling to repair it after the season has already begun. That is not the image this sport wants. Formula One is supposed to represent the sharpest minds, the best drivers, and the fastest racing machines in the world. It is supposed to feel extreme, confident, and relentless. But when the cars start looking compromised, when the drivers stop sounding excited, and when emergency meetings become the main story, the whole project starts to look shaky. That is why Miami now feels so important. Not just because of the racing itself, because it may be the first real sign of whether Formula One can rescue this new era before the damage goes deeper. If the changes work, the sport gets a second chance. If they fail, the criticism will only get louder. And if nothing meaningful changes at all, then this 2026 rules package could go from controversial to genuinely damaging. So the next question is no longer whether Formula One has a problem. It clearly does. The real question now is whether the FIA can fix it before the season slips further away from what Formula One is supposed to be. Because this is no longer just about regulations. It is about whether the sport still knows how to protect its racing.